Cluster 5 of the local questionnaire assesses whether communities affected by decisions concerning their rights to land, property, or natural resources are meaningfully informed and consulted in a way that lives up to human rights standards. The central human rights and related standards for this cluster are the right to participation, the right to information, and the cross-cutting right to equality and non-discrimination. All of these rights are binding on states that have ratified the instruments, and the key instrument here is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And these rights are also found in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in many constitutions of countries around the world. Respect for the right to information and the right to participation are important preconditions for meaningful consultation in connection with, for example, projects that affect people's rights to land, territories, and resources. If we look across human rights instruments, for example, ILO Convention 169, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, but also the voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure, and the guidelines from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on participation in non-electoral contexts, then we can derive a human rights standard on meaningful consultation. It becomes clear that meaningful consultation is consultation which is conducted in good faith. It is an ongoing process, not just while a project is happening, but before a decision has been made, during, but also after. Consultation must be with legitimate representatives of the concerned rights holders, so those chosen by a community to represent them. There must be sufficient and transparent information, and it must be in relevant languages with no barriers. For example, also form is important, that the formats are appropriate to the context, audio, visual, or in other ways so that all rights holders can understand the information. There must be a genuine opportunity to influence any decision made, and in the case of indigenous peoples, the purpose must be to obtain consent, free, prior, and informed consent. The consultation must be free of pressure or with no fear of retaliation. A few more points here on the concept of free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples. ILO Convention 169 says that consultations shall be undertaken in good faith and in form appropriate to the circumstances with the objective of achieving agreement or consent to the proposed measures. And the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 10, upholds that indigenous peoples shall not be forcibly removed from their lands or territories, that no relocation shall take place without the free, prior, and informed consent, and after agreement on just and fair compensation, and where possible, the option of return. Several international human rights bodies have stressed the importance of human rights due diligence and prior social and environmental impact assessments in relation to projects or other measures affecting people's rights to land. So the question is, what does a good impact assessment look like from a human rights perspective? It would be participatory and inclusive and transparent. It would assess risks to the full set of human rights and using human rights standards as a benchmark. It would identify mitigation measures for any risks identified, and it would ensure access to remedy for rights holders affected. Let's get specific and look at what a good impact assessment would look at. It would look at how rights to land, property, and natural resources might be affected, including access and use, for example. It would look at the full area of land used by the community and not just a specific inhabited area, for example. How resources for livelihoods might be affected by the project, so agricultural, forestry, fishing resources, for example. It would look at how work and employment, traditional and informal occupations, income and salary, contractual conditions, health and safety at work, or working conditions might be affected. How the environment could be affected. So this includes both air, drinking water, soil, vegetation, animal life, for example. It would assess the economic consequences of the proposed project, both in terms of employment and job opportunities, positive or negative changes. how traditional or religious places or the ability to practice customary beliefs, traditions, or religion might be affected, and how women especially will be affected by the project or measure. In the online local questionnaire, I'll go into Cluster 5, access to information, consultation, and participation. You'll find questions here that assess whether any consultation processes that have taken place, whether they live up to human rights standards, and whether they took place at all. So in Cluster 3, we looked at specifically cases of dispossession, eviction, and relocation, whereas this is a more broad look at any projects or measures that have impacted people's lands and livelihoods and whether they were consulted in relation to those interventions.